Good evening. Yes, okay, we're on. So welcome everyone. This is a regular meeting of the Committee on Public Service. I'm standing in for our chair, Jim Leahy, who can't make it this evening. My name is Rebecca Lisi. I'm a counselor at large, and I am vice chair of the committee who will be conducting the lead of the interviews this evening. To my right, we have Counselor at Large Joe McGivern. Also joining us, we have Ward 5 City Councilor Linda Vacan, and to our left, we have City Councilor at Large Peter Tallman. Tonight on the agenda, we have the interviews for the position of the Holyoke City Auditor. The first one on our agenda is Jeffrey Bates. Is this Jeffrey Bates? Jeremiah, what's your name? Blankenbaker. Okay. So we're moving out of order to our second interviewee. So Jeremiah Blankenbaker, welcome. Would you just start off and give us an overview of your qualifications for the position and also what made you interested in applying for the job? One moment, I need you to hit the button so that the green light comes on.
There we go.
There we go, thank you.
Everything 1 second, it's off track. So I'm an EV analyst. I monitor budgets for the Pratt & Whitney PW F-135, which is the engine for the Joint Strike Fighter. I monitor the budgets for their spares programs. I myself and other members of my team are tasked with, everything 1 second, I'm trying to get my thoughts in the words, are tasked to pretty much essentially keep track of how the budget is spent. We're provided with a baseline for a parts order, for spare parts. We baseline that order, and then we monitor the life cycle on that order, cataloging and reporting on any cost variances where the cost of the part is deviating from its initial plan or the initial budget. It's time of delivery or schedule variances if it was delivered early or late. And we try to do some research on why, whether it's due to bottlenecks caused by the supplier. The supplier isn't able to get us the parts on time for various production reasons, or cost of the material has gone up or cost of the material has gone down. So we try to keep tabs on that. We also report on what we call an EAC, estimate at completion, which is the actual budget spent and how much you expect to spend in the future, which changes from month to month based on estimated costs for future deliveries. So it seems kind of convoluted and confusing, but I'm sure if with enough time I could explain it more clear. But it's really just essentially we monitor the budget and how it's spent and kind of report to Pratt & Whitney what's going on.
Great, and then could you just help us make the connection between how you see that skill set transferring to the work that you'd be required to do as a city auditor?
So like I had mentioned before, we monitor the budget. So like with every department in town, you have a budget, and as the auditor, you're keeping track of how that budget is spent, and you're looking for deviations from the initial plan, and as as what I currently do now as an EV analyst, that's very similar to what I do. I look for deviations from the plan. The added responsibility for an auditor, I'd be looking for ways to spend more efficiently. If I would be looking for waste as well, which is something we're encouraged to do over at Quest for Pratt & Whitney, but it's not our primary objective.
Great, and then just one more follow-up question. You had mentioned that you're working in a team dynamic.
Yes, ma'am.
And do you have a lead role in the team, or what's your role within the team?
I take the lead role. I report to my team lead, but as the senior analyst there, I am the one with the most experience and most strongest understanding of how our process works, where to and how to problem solve any issues that may arise that deviate outside the process.
Great, thank you. Other members like to ask any questions? Councilor McGowan.
Thank you, Councilor. Jeremy, welcome, and thank you for an interest in the position and for taking the time out to meet with us. I'm always fascinated about jobs, and you gave a good, I know what you said convoluted, but you get a good vision of what you do for work. And I used to work in a manufacturer and did something similar in terms of production flow, which I think you do something a little different than that, but you connect the dots. In municipal government, you know, reading your resume, I think you can make some comparisons, but have you had any experience with municipal government or with the tools that we use, example, Munis, in terms of monitoring our budget and being able to provide the services that an auditor would be required to provide?
I do not have any experience working in the municipal government setting, or not terribly familiar with many of the tools that you may be using. But with that being said, I think I would welcome the challenge on learning the tools and adding that to my skill set so I can improve on my performance in the position.
That's actually a good answer. Jeremy, in order to do that, your education is in business and management. Good university, no questions there. Do you have accounting skills, or do you have skills that would fit the position that you've applied for?
Accounting, I can't necessarily speak to being an accountant or doing many of accounting skills, but based on from my education and from my preparing budgets for when I worked at the soup kitchen, I wrote grants for the soup kitchen in Willimantic, and my position as a budget analyst at Quest. I think many of those skills I would be able to use in lieu of a formal accounting background or accounting education.
Thank you.
Let's see. So as our city auditor, you'll be responsible for a budget of $150 million and more. So what is the largest budget that you've had to manage? It sounds like that may not be a directly applicable question, but I'd like to hear the largest budget that you've been charged to manage, and then in the absence of actually directly managing the budget, what are the challenges that you anticipate at this point having to face?
The largest budget I've had to not necessarily manage, but monitor has been closer to $50 million, which is, may seem like a substantial sum, but when looking at it from stepping back and looking at it on the entire engine program for a flight of jets, that's kind of a drop in a bucket when we're managing a budget for all the F-135s that may be deployed to, that are owned by Australia or Israel, because we maintain those engines as well. The challenge that I can foresee, there's going to be a lot more data points. There's going to be a lot more places where I would have to monitor. If I'm monitoring an order of $50 million, I may have only 500 parts within that order and many sub-assemblies. But when I'm looking at the town budget, it's a much larger machine, a lot more moving parts, essentially, to kind of make that connection. Mm-hmm. You have the police department, you have the Board of Education, you have many other departments that operate within the city. And that would be a challenge I would welcome, because to try to wrangle that much, is a feat that would be an awesome feat.
Great. Are there other questions from committee members or counselors present? Counselor Bacon.
Thank you. So you made mention of more departments and more data sets to keep an eye on. And so along with that comes a whole lot of people. Mm-hmm. And so you will have people coming from various points of view, from the city council setting laws, from the mayor, the CEO of the city, looking at day-to-day operations and initiating projects and coming to the council for cash and bonding and things of that nature, as well as the different committees and the retirement board and bond agencies that you'd also be interacting with relative to borrowing. And so when relating to these various groups, from time to time, there are competing interests, differing points of view. And so I'd be interested to know how you would see the role when there are pressures from one direction and another relative to the use of funds, the use of bonding, the use of, as one unique example, a stabilization fund, which many of us on the council liken to perhaps an analogy would be to an emergency fund in your home is how many on the council look at it. Others have a little different philosophical approach to how that sort of guarantee pot of money can be used and managed. So when you're faced with, say, a difference of opinion on a matter, such as, let's take, for example, the use of a fund that's stipulated to be for emergencies, and you've got different constituencies coming at you from the point of view of auditing, how would you see yourself answering the differing interests when it came down to a use of money?
Well, that presents a very complex dilemma for anybody. First and foremost, I would have to recognize that while I may not view it as important, and other members, other constituents may not be reviewing their requirements or their requests as important, to them it is. So the first thing is to kind of try to understand why they need it. What do they want? What purpose does it serve? And keep in mind that all of the other constituents, I'm sorry, I'm really terrible at pronouncing that word, all stakeholders and individuals with interest in the funds, they're all looking to meet the same goal, which is to serve the people of Holyoke. And so I would have to keep that in mind first and foremost, that they think it's important and we're all looking to meet the same goal. Moving forward, it would have, I would have to work with others to kind of find out what would actually be the best benefit for the community. Are we going to get our dollars worth? And it kind of boils down to what I do at Quest is are we getting what we're going to pay for? Are we going to get a benefit out of it that's going to be worth it for the entire community? And that would require a great deal of not only research, but assistance from all the other stakeholders to determine on, are these requests valid? Are they needed? Which ones are more important and which ones are going to serve the most people most effectively? So I wouldn't be able to say completely clear how to answer that question, but I have an idea where to start. That's to understand why, understand that everyone's looking for the same goal, and try to find out how to best serve the people of Holyoke.
Thank you. And just as a follow-up, say in a circumstance where the city had to go out to borrow for certain long-term assets that we would be acquiring, would it be, as a matter of practice, one that you would take where you would inform, say, the people considering the bonding and the expense as to the availability of borrowing room, and along with the availability of how much there might be available to borrow, would you see it as a routine part of the information that you would put forth, carrying costs of such monies to be borrowed?
Yes. I believe in giving as much information to the stakeholders as possible, regardless on who or what it is. You know, when I worked at the soup kitchen, when I wished to spearhead a program, leaning project, I was given the board of directors full disclosure on all associated costs moving forward. If you're borrowing and bonding, I want all the stakeholders to, I would want all the stakeholders to understand the costs down the road. And if the city of Holyoke was to borrow, they need to know what the interest rate and the carrying costs on in the future so that they can plan on it, so that way it's not a surprise 10 years down the road that they have a sudden spike in interest. I am a big fan of transparency. I worked at the soup kitchen. I operated in that fashion. I operate the same fashion at Quest, where full disclosure, people may not like it, but it prevents problems and surprises from coming down the road, because problems and surprises, regardless on where you're at, causes a great deal of difficulties. If I'm placing an order or I'm baselining something for Pratt & Whitney and I find a hiccup, like, well, this probably shouldn't be here, but it's not that important. Think about it 3 years down the road. Suddenly we're spending $100 million on a part that we should have only spent maybe 10, because I didn't do my due diligence on figuring out what's going on. So it's important for transparency.
Thank you.
Councilor Tallman.
Yes, thank you, Jeremiah, for coming down and showing an interest in serving the city here. And this is a very, very important position in city government, and that's why we have these interviews with several candidates. And I just had the main question I had, and a lot of my colleagues had some really good questions, is as an auditor, you'll supervise 2 to 3 employees. I'm just wondering if have you ever supervised multiple employees before, and tell me about your experience.
My experience in supervision, my formal experience in supervision, was I served as a volunteer coordinator for the Covenant Soup Kitchen, where I would supervise the groups of volunteers that we worked with, and try to utilize their talents as best as possible to serve our organization. Unofficially, I have worked with Quest as the senior analyst to help kind of captain the team moving forward. But my formal experience as the volunteer coordinator, the best way I could put it is that everybody has something to offer, and as the leader, I don't know everything. And that's kind of where I come from, as from a managerial or leadership position, is that I may be in charge, but I don't know how to do everyone's job. And that is the first and foremost. I'm going to be coming into the position seeking their guidance on how to operate within the culture and constraints of the position. While I may have ultimate responsibility, there are the daily processes that I am unfamiliar with, and those that serve under me I would be leaning on them to help show me how to not only perform those processes, but also improve on them and their day-to-day input. It's like, is this a good idea? Is this going to work? Is it not going to work? Is also extremely important. So it's not just a matter of just, hey, I'm your supervisor. It's we work as a team to move the department forward, and that's how I would come at as the manager of the said department.
Thank you.
I have one more question that I want to ask. It's kind of looping back around to where we started. So when you were talking about the work that you're doing as a senior analyst and identifying costs and schedule variations, and then also doing some research as to why, have you done anything in your line of work to then make recommendations on how to change the processes?
Yes.
So you would be able to create and alter processes to make them more efficient?
Yes, and kind of take a step to my own personal experiences. I don't like waste. So I try to improve upon making things easier, moving forward, whether, it's at work or at home. If I find an easier way to do it, I always seek the easier way, the less effort to make something happen, to achieve my objective. I try to find a better way of doing it, and I'm always open to that. At Quest, we are encouraged to find new and inventive ways to meet the objectives for our customer at Pratt Whitney. I have done that on a couple of occasions. I've actually been recognized for changing a process and taking a full-time work and breaking it down to something that only requires 10 hours worth of review in order to meet the objective. And that was, kind of keeping track of blueprints going in and out to the customer in Russia for one of their commercial jet programs. I've done small things as an EV&A analyst to kind of break down the process to as bare bones as possible, so that way we can achieve the same objective with someone who may have less experience. So that way, if we have a turnover and we lose somebody, we can have somebody come in, spend some time training with them, and we can get them going on more process-driven items, and then they'll have time to pick up on the analytical work moving forward.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions that they'd like to ask the candidate? Councilor McGivern?
Just, if I could, Jeremy, real quick, because you said something interesting about stakeholders and constituents you pronounce very well. It took me 20 years to pronounce that, and constituency is even harder. But stakeholders are important. Now, look at what government is. We have a form of government, we have a mayor who thinks he's stronger than the city council, and we have a city council who thinks we're stronger than the mayor. And we have to work together to get everything on a level playing ground, or try to get everything on a level playing ground to be able to resolve things. In order to get things on a level playing ground, we both need the data to be exact, or the known data to be exact, especially in terms of a budget. So we're the appointing body for the auditor. We don't manage the auditor. We don't really manage anyone, but we are responsible for appointing an auditor. The mayor is the chief financial officer, the executive director of the city of Holyoke, who manages in a way that each mayor will choose their own style. The mayor pretty much dictates what the salary increases and things are going to be for most individuals, with approval by the council. So what I just painted was a picture of, I need the information from the auditor, as all do city councilors. The mayor needs the information. You're working with several department heads who are going to work with you. It's not always going to be clear cut as to who's playing what agenda and who's doing the right thing. Okay? I know, without saying, you don't have to tell us that the right thing is what's right for the constituents of ours out there. That's what we want. How do you balance that when you get in the middle of a tug of war?
That is not something, that is something I have experienced before in the past, working, maybe not on a $100 million scale, but trying to balance the interests of stakeholders at the soup kitchen, the people that the soup kitchen serve, the executive director, the board of directors, and, those that funded the soup kitchen. Everyone has their own agenda and plan. And I've experienced similar, items, as leader of as a rugby team in college, and as the publicity secretary for the team in Springfield. Every organization has multiple stakeholders, and everybody has, I don't want to say their own agenda, because it sounds kind of, because that sounds kind of terrible, but everyone has their own idea of how things should be. When it comes to the terms of the budget, it is what it is. If you have a $100 million budget and you have X amount of delegated to each department, it is what it is. If you kind of can't mince words, and one department may not like the fact that you're reporting that they're coming close to overspending, or they're on track to overspend, or they're not using their budget in a timely fashion. They maybe have a budget of $10 million, but have only used 5 of it, and you're already 3/4 of the way through the fiscal year. So everybody may not be happy on how it's reported, but it needs to be reported, the financial situation of the city. It's a clear picture. People may not like it. I may not be popular for delivering that picture, but again, it boils down to transparency.
You would be popular with the city council.
Pardon?
You would be popular with the city council.
I don't, and again, I kind of don't want to speak to myself that personally, but I put my name on that report. And anything I like to put my name to, I like it to be clear, concise, and accurate, because it represents me as a person. I take, regardless of the work that I do, anything that I do, I take it personally that it is the quality work the best I can provide. A good example that is not work related, again, I play rugby for the Springfield Rifles, and I'm the publicity secretary. And for some godforsaken reason, we thought it'd be a great idea to run a fundraiser for guys in North Carolina, which is absolutely needed. But they gave me a week to do it, and that was a challenge. And so I myself took the lead and tried to do my best to ensure that we could provide at least something to the food bank in North Carolina to help support those that don't have it down there at this point. Because that's where people go typically first, is to the food bank when they're in a they reach that kind of national disaster. So I took the pride at, if I drop the ball, it looks poorly on me. And so I take it very seriously, regardless on what it is. If I'm putting my name to it, I want it to be the best and clearest that it can be. Reflects on myself as a person.
Jeremy, thank you. That was a very refreshing answer.
It's Jeremiah.
Jeremiah?
Yeah.
I said
Quite all right.
Jeremiah. It's Jerry. I know.
And
Thank you.
We're joined at this moment by our City Council President, Todd McGee. I think this is the conclusion of your interview, unless there's anything else. Okay. So we will be making a recommendation to the full City Council. It's not a formal recommendation, but we'll be reporting out what happens in each of the interviews. And then the full City Council has the ability to vote for anyone who they choose based on the reports that we give. So thanks for your time this evening. You are welcome to come to the meeting on Tuesday night of next week if you're interested. Will this be on the agenda for next Tuesday? We'll follow up with you if it actually makes it onto the agenda for next week. And then you're welcome to come down or,
2 weeks.
October 2nd.
October 2nd.
sorry, October 2nd.
Quite all right.
2 weeks, October 2nd. So we'll be following up about next steps.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeremiah.
I appreciate the opportunity Thank you.
This guy didn't show up.
Do you want a packet of applications and the
You
agenda?
got it, but a lot of them are, yeah.
They're not in order, so you might have to.
At the agenda? At the agenda?
Yeah.
The list of interviewees?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm going to need more
Paying for your
paper.
assistant? Are you paying for your assistant?
I did. I gave him some Pez.
All right.
That's a pretty good stipend.
That's my favorite.
Hello? Thank you.
Welcome.
You just sit right there because you'll have a microphone for yourself and the green light should be on.
Right.
So welcome.
Thank you.
So before us currently is Elizabeth Harlo-Harris. I met you in the hallway, Rebecca Lisi, City
Yes.
Councilor at Large. I'm standing in for Committee Chair Jim Leahy this evening. As the Vice Chair, I'll be working to coordinate the discussion this evening. We're also joined by Councilor at Large Joe McGivern, Ward 5 City Councilor Linda Vacan, Councilor at Large Peter Tallman, and our City Council President Todd McGee. So I think we'll just hand you the baton, Elizabeth, and you could start us off by speaking a bit about your education and work experience and how you think that makes you a qualified fit for the city auditor position.
Well, I was really excited when I read the advertisement because I've been working for 30 years in the corporate environment, and I was looking, our company was bought out by a company in Texas, and so they shifted all the jobs from Connecticut down to Texas. Mm-hmm. So that's basically why I'm looking for a job. But then I saw an opportunity to get into municipal accounting, and that was kind of my passion over the years. I started my career at Williston Northampton School doing fund accounting and took a course at Westfield State College. I audited a course in municipal accounting back in probably 1986-ish. But, fast forward 20 plus years, my focus at my prior company was cash accounting. My focus was participating in internal, external audits. I helped the company stay in compliance with SOX and GAAP accounting. One of my key focuses in my job was also unclaimed property. I brought the company into compliance nationally. I went through 2 major Delaware audits, providing support and direction for the company. Our most recent audit was because we were bought out by a company in Michigan first and then a company in Texas. Our company in Michigan was under audit, so we came under a Delaware audit. They assessed us a $1 million fine if we did not do any work. I worked with our director of accounting and the VP control of the company and brought our liability down to $100,000. But through that, I then began, as my job transitioned, to do the full filing for unclaimed property. So I'm used to going on church, state websites, looking at requirements for filing for each state. Each state has different laws and regulations, and you have to stay in compliance. So I'm used to working with the government websites to do the research to find out what's involved. Velasas was a $2.8 billion revenue with 4,000 employees. I handled the payroll interface into the general ledger, supported the payroll department. I also did the balance sheet recs to ensure that when we withheld taxes, they were supplementally paid to the federal government. We ran into a situation where when I first started, somebody took a deal with a company and they proceeded to take our tax liability and never paying it to the federal government. So once we found that out, we settled, we changed payroll companies, and I worked to develop procedures. So we reached out to that federal government and said, what's been reported? And then we looked at the payroll reports from the outside vendor to ensure what was withheld was actually received by the IRS. So I've worked multifaceted in an audit capacity as well as day-to-day operations. I handled all the cash recs for the company, and as I said, brought us into compliance. I will, just for the city councils, one of my sidelines was recouping money from states for our company. I did find the city of Holyoke has about 20 items on the state of Mass unclaimed property website. So I will pass that on.
Tell me, we know that one?
Many of them are under $100, maybe not significant, but the police department has some, and the city has some, and the gas and electric have some. So it's kind of one of the fun things I do on the side. I look for family and friends and see who's got unclaimed property in the state of Massachusetts. So that's just a little fun fact I have for you.
Wow.
So
Great.
That's kind of a general overview, and I'm certainly open to any questions and anything you'd like me to reiterate.
Great, thank you. Councilor McGivern, do you want to kick off our next question?
Sure. Elizabeth, welcome, and thank you for applying, but thank you for coming down and sharing the evening with us and giving us your background, but also being able to answer some of our questions. your description in your resume goes hand in hand with a job that requires an educational background, and just for the record, I graduated from Westfield State College in I won't tell you, well, I will tell you, 1977. So I mean, when you took that course there, I wasn't still there, but it's still a great school.
It is a great school.
Your education, the background at Western New England College, which is also a great school, shows with the accounting, education being part of that, shows us, skills that you have, and the way you talk, you show us the skills that you have. Do you have, and it doesn't, any municipal skills in terms of the budget process? Do you have any skills or any knowledge? You looked on the website for the money that the state treasurers tell people that are, that is unaccountable for. But what about our state regulations or municipal government regulations that we have to go by? Do you have any?
I am not as strong in municipal regulations with the state. However, I am willing to do any research necessary. As I said, I am used to going on websites, doing all research necessary. I understand encumbrance accounting. I've done budgets and assisted with actual versus budget in the corporate environment, but through cost center managers, which is very consistent with reporting for a municipality. So while that's not a strong point of mine, I feel that my research and my ability to follow my predecessor, as well as to go online, and there's so many resources available.
One of the key terms I like to throw out in these interviews, but most people, if they don't have experience with it, I don't think I say it the correct way, but we use Munis for a lot of our accounting, a lot of things. And your computer skills, are you able to adjust into different software, different programs, different companies, and be able to adapt to that? Can you elaborate on anything you've done or you've had to learn on your own?
Well, our company has gone through several transitions, like our payroll processing, where we've had to change from in-house payroll to external through companies, and I've been one of the key liaisons to take the output from the new company and reformat it and manipulate it to get it to be able to interface into the financial system. I've also worked significantly with upgrades and testing when we've gone to, say, from in-house to web-based financial packages. I also think that my adaptability with Microsoft Excel, etc., and the new tools, how that has changed over the years. I started at Williston with DigiCalc, and you had to say there's 4 columns and 3 rows, and then the next thing I know, we were saying we have to take off the undo function in Lotus because there's not enough memory for us to do things. So I've adapted through all the different, from Lotus to Excel. I've worked with many of the software packages.
And I think you're making reference to when your company switched to Oracle, which I will tell you, I'm a state employee, my full-time job, and we only within the last year switched, and I won't tell you how many people on the state level it took to do what you probably did by yourself, but I thank you for your answer.
You're welcome.
I'm going to follow up and ask, so it seems that you haven't had a direct responsibility of managing a budget, and the city has a budget of $150 million or so. And so could you speak in some ways to what challenges you're anticipating at this point in time in managing or helping to manage a budget of that size?
Oh, so we didn't have, because we were corporate, some of it, we had another department, it did a lot of the budgeting, but we were responsible for assessing the actual to the budget. And as I said, we were a $2.8 billion company. So each cost center had significant expense, and we were assigned, say, 10, 12 cost centers to look at, to assess, to give guidance, to work directly with the P&A, financial planning and analysis, to find out, you know, if they budgeted something, why is the expense twice as high as budgeted? Oh, wait a minute, an invoice came in that is for 3 months, we need to split that up. I worked closely with cost center managers to help work with them to find out what was going on instead of just assuming. I definitely feel very strongly in partnership with folks I am working with. It's, you know, as an auditor, I have full responsibility and I can hold people accountable, but I also feel that there's a need for partnership and not a dictator type attitude with folks. You get a lot better if you say, okay, let's see how we can do this together, or what kind of feedback can you give me to help me make some decisions that need to be presented to the city council, to the mayor, whoever the final approval of the budget is.
Great, thank you for that response. Anyone else have any questions this evening? Councilor Bacon?
Thank you. Thanks for coming down. So this is a good segue to talk about the people part of the role. And you talked internally about how you would function with a team. There's also going to be a great number of stakeholders that would be impacting upon you, besides the mayor and the city council, who have their own arenas and perceptions about their roles and interests in serving the public. We have the retirement board, outside bond agencies that look at our ratings. And so I'm interested to understand how you would see yourself interfacing with the varied interests and pressures that might bear upon you from us. As an example, I would give you would be the use of a fund that we call the stabilization fund, which is sort of what those of us who are conservative-minded around the finances consider the untouchable piggy bank, except in dire emergencies. Other folks have a little different philosophical approach to how some of perhaps the earned income of the account might be used. And so how you would balance and respond to the varied groups and interests that they might put before you.
Well, first, I always feel there's two sides to every discussion, there's two opinions, and the most important thing is mutual respect. You have to have mutual respect, you have to have understanding, you have to have passion and compassion to say, these are our options and we need to have a decision, and maybe we have to weigh out the pros and cons, but there's no one right answer. There's no one person that has the right solution. You have to get all your information, get all your facts, and then you have to present it to the deciding body.
Thank you. And just as a follow-up, in an instance where the city was, say, borrowing money for a long-term capital expense, in your role as auditor, in talking to the different parties as to, say, what the availability for borrowing was, along with what, say, the carrying costs of the borrowing would be, would you see that kind of information as going hand in hand? I mean, there's instances where you would be asked, how much room do we have to borrow, say, for bonding? Which, you know, would be a simple answer of a number, but the but part is, how much would it cost us every year if we use it? How would you characterize your sharing of information with the parties of interest?
My typical sharing is to get as much information out and to share as much information from both perspectives as possible to the parties that need to know. So this is, if we take this much, this is the cost benefit, and this is what you might have to give up next year because we've taken more than we need this year, or we need this year, so we're gonna have to assess and be firm next year on how we watch our resources. And so if we have a capital project this year that is gonna yield revenue in the future or yield some kind of benefit in the future, maybe we need to take a little more than we're comfortable with because the ultimate yield is more than that choice of short-term loss. So it would be definitely a balance, it would be researching and understanding the fund, also understanding the state requirements of each fund. It's key that you don't cross state regs. It's very important you don't cross state regs. And if there's a state reg that overrides, or a city charter reg, you can't waste money. You can't spend more than you have just at a whim. So you would have to weigh and balance all that information before you made a final decision.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Councilor Tallman?
Yep, thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth, for coming down and showing an interest in this very, very important position in our city. As you know, that we've had several candidates, and this role is very important in city government, one of the most important financial positions in the city. My question is, and I notice says you do have some experience supervising. In this position as auditor, you supervise 2 to 3 people. And I'm just wondering what type of experience you've had supervising and how you would handle different situations in that role.
So, as a supervisor, my responsibility first and foremost is to be a mentor, to help people understand why they're doing what, how they're doing what, but also to hold folks accountable. As a supervisor, you need to hold the folks accountable to accomplish the task they need to do. They need to meet the deadlines. We're dealing with many state deadlines, I'm sure, as a city municipality. You can't miss a deadline. You cannot miss that. The interest and penalties is way past what you would even want. So I would, first of all, help my staff understand the need to meet the deadlines, the need to work with others, the positive need to communicate. I have no problem seeing a staff person, and if there's an issue, addressing it directly with that person, so I believe in being fair, but I also believe in holding folks accountable for their jobs.
Thank you.
Great. Does anyone have any follow-up questions? No? All right. Any parting words for us then, Elizabeth?
Well, as I said, I'm very excited at this opportunity, and although I don't have municipal experience and I'm not a CPA, I've worked for many CPAs. I've worked for a company. When we were AVA, we were A rating with all the SEC. I've worked for CPAs. My standard was I was expected to perform as a CPA. I worked for SOX, coming into SOX compliance nationally. I've worked with unclaimed property. So I feel that my lack of experience in municipality is balanced by my experience in cash and my experience in supervising people and partnering with other folks. So I am very excited, and I am honored to have the opportunity to share my experience with all of you.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.
So the next steps in this process, we'll be giving an overview of this interview process. Counselors can also access tonight's meeting from home, or there'll be a recording of it. But we'll be giving an overview of the interview process and highlighting some of the features that we liked about each of the candidates. And then on October 2nd, each city councilor gets to nominate someone. So there's no recommendation, and it's yays and nays. It's everybody gets to nominate whomever they like. So you're welcome to join us on October 2nd for that meeting. But I think that our administrative assistant, Ryan Allen, will follow up with you on next steps.
Great.
Yes.
Thank you again for the opportunity. I've enjoyed speaking with each of you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, it is good, yeah.
It could be either James or Ian Spence, whichever you can take this chair right in here. with the microphone lit up.
Like I'm, being called into a hearing or something. Yeah, that is technically the case, yes.
Sometimes there are.
I can't recall the last time I had to speak into a microphone. Thank you.
Welcome. We have James Ian Spence before us. From what I understand, you go by Ian.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming and joining us this evening, Ian, and also for your interest in the position. We'll pass the baton over to you, and why don't you just kick us off with a little description about how you think that your education and work experience makes you a qualified fit for the auditor's position.
Well, first of all, one thing I do want to address, maybe one could say preemptively, is because I am sure this is part of the experience of at least some of your other candidates, is I am not actually an accountant by trade. I've worked with accountants, particularly at the Internal Revenue Service. My girlfriend is actually an accountant, but I am not. I've studied managerial accounting in grad school while pursuing my Master of Public Administration at the University of Connecticut. That has given me a kind of broad overview of accounting, especially in the context of public budgeting and finance, that I think would be valuable for this position. I also think that my experience at the IRS, analyzing the finances of a wide range of individual and business taxpayers to determine their ability to pay their tax burden, looking at financial statements and documents closely matching the statements of taxpayers with the actual material facts of their finances would give me a good background for auditing work in a municipal context, although I understand that that is a very different kind of work. I also, going back to my grad school coursework, think that having a basic understanding of the budgeting process as it exists in municipal government could be useful because the basis of an audit is the budget that is agreed upon, or one of the things when you're looking at variances. I think that probably the single biggest thing, as unsatisfactory as it may sound to mention, is that I do have a very strong attention to detail. I have a curiosity for figuring things out. When I was a revenue officer at the IRS, although it was not, there were certain aspects of it, of the bureaucracy and the constraints placed on me in that context that made it less than an ideal position for me. The one thing about the job that I really excelled at was investigating, finding people, finding things, and I think my ability to analyze data and to see what's there and to see things that maybe are irregularities or discrepancies would make me a strong candidate for this position.
Great, thank you. Who'd like to ask the next question? Councilor McGivern?
Thank you. Ian, welcome, and not just for your interest in applying for the position, but welcome, Ian, but your interest for applying for the position and also for coming down to answer some of our questions is very helpful, and we appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.
IRS, that just, I think most people just cringe when they hear that. But you made it sound like it was a position and a job that you enjoyed, and it looked like you did interact with taxpayers.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you relate your experience in your education? And I think you did a good job of explaining your resume, highlights it, and certainly that master's, I think, would be helpful in this type of position. But can you relate any experience you have or what you think would take to get the experience to understand Mass General laws and municipal government when it pertains to the budget process?
Well, I I think I don't claim to have any expertise on Massachusetts state law as it either relates to the municipal budgeting process or municipal finance and municipal expenditures, but as someone who has had to do a lot of reading, research, both in and out of academia, I'm confident that I could research the statutes that are applicable to the particular questions in municipal finance in Massachusetts. My understanding of public finance and municipal finance is generally more abstract. It's when I went to grad school at UConn, obviously that was in Connecticut, not Massachusetts. But they did teach about a number of aspects of municipal finance, such as capital finance, capital investment planning, tax systems, more in the abstract than in the concrete of either state or local government in either Massachusetts or Connecticut. But I feel that that has given me a framework to understand the specific issues to municipal finance in Massachusetts.
Thank you.
Great. And then to follow up, so it seems that from your work experience, you have not had to manage a budget directly. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
And then for the city, as the city's auditor, you'll be charged with managing a budget of $150 million. So how do you think you'll be able to translate these skills into the management of the budget and also creating processes for the maintenance of the budget?
Well, I understand that this job would have a very steep learning curve, and that is something that I completely would embrace. I would rely on coworkers. I would rely on people who are more knowledgeable than me for the expert opinions and the background. I would do my own research again into applicable law. I would look at precedents established by past practice. If necessary or suggested, I would look at best practices from elsewhere. I think that part of the skill set I've developed in the different jobs I've had has been learning on the fly and figuring out what within a particular process is optimal and what is less than optimal. One thing that I learned in grad school that I've found useful in a lot of settings is the idea of creating a logic or process model whereby you look at inputs, activities, outputs, and outcomes, and that provides a framework to understand how any program exists within its environment and uses resources effectively.
Great. Thank you for that. Any other questions from members present? Councilor Tallman.
Yep. I have a question. Ian, thanks for coming down and showing an interest in our city, and it's a very important role in our running the city and the finance, and you'll be dealing with a lot of different people, from the mayor to the council to the department heads. Do you, as the auditor, you would be basically a supervisor. You'd be the department head of over maybe 2 to 3 employees. Could you tell me if you have any experience supervising employees and what that would be?
I do have supervisory experience, although it's very different from anything I would have as city auditor here. Between college and grad school, I was assistant manager of an online retailer for a little over 3 years. I supervised a staff that varied from time at any given point in time between probably about a dozen and 14 or 15 employees. These were employees who worked in a warehouse setting, fulfilling the orders that we received from customers on a variety of online venues, Amazon being the one that probably has the greatest name recognition. But in this context, I would like to think that I used and developed a maybe more universal set of supervisory skills, mediating conflicts between people, getting to the bottom of issues with our processes that were affecting the quality of our output, and also training as well. In such an environment, one inevitably gets a certain degree of turnover, so I developed training materials for training new hires, and also streamlined the process of how we fulfilled orders, in part in response to customer issues, which I had a firsthand view of, also managing customer service for the business. So I would like to think that gave me a transferable degree of supervisory experience, although I recognize that the specifics would be very radically different here as well.
Thank you, Ian.
I just want to ask one follow-up question. So despite the fact that it was an online retailer, you were face-to-face with the employees, is that correct?
Yes, the online aspect of it was with the customers. We shipped on 16 different venues to customers around the world. They could place their orders through Amazon, eBay, Libris. It was primarily books, but also electronic media as well. But we, like many online businesses, operated out of a warehouse space, which enabled us to have economies of scale and pass along savings to the customer, which is what has allowed e-commerce to proliferate as it has.
Thanks for that clarification. Other questions from committee members?
I think I'm all set.
Okay.
Maybe just a quick thought. And I think Councilor Lisi, kind of talked about the face-to-face, and obviously the auditor in City of Holyoke has not just the face-to-face that Councilor Tallman talked about with the staff of the department, but with other department heads. And the stakeholders are the constituency of the city, which means the mayor is elected, chief financial officer has a big say over all department heads, kind of a management type say. We are the appointing authority, but not the management, of individuals on a daily basis. But we're all in it together. We're all stakeholders. I don't know how most municipal governments go, but because I don't pay close attention to them, but in the city of Holyoke, it's pretty typical that the mayor thinks he's in charge and the city council thinks they're in charge. And somewhere along the line, we get into the common ground most of the time, and we try to resolve things in most of the time together. To do that, we need the same data, the only data, the accurate data of what's going on. Can you give us some insight as to how you would handle that if the pressure from different sides was pushing you not to share all the data?
I just want to clarify one thing. My position would not, all of the data that I would create or compile as city auditor, none of it would be privileged. This is all data that is in fact, that all the parties you've named are entitled to, correct?
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
I would want to be as transparent as possible within the limits of the position as I could, and I would also want to make my reasoning as clear as possible. One thing I know from having worked for the federal government as well as temporary positions for federal and also technically I think state level contractors, is the necessity of documenting everything to show what your thought processes are, to justify your decisions, to justify the assumptions you use in using certain numbers for certain calculations. And I think that that would be a way to be both in my own position above reproach and also to, I guess, make everyone as happy as I could.
Not just happy, but informed.
Yes.
You know, I think if we're informed, we have to make the decisions ultimately, and ultimately everything comes out.
No, I understand that
It's a timely thing.
the political authority is greater than that of the managers and technocrats, and that is certainly something I respect.
Thank you, Ian.
So if there's no further questions, I think we thank you for coming down this evening.
Thank you.
The next steps in this process, we don't make a recommendation on any one candidate to the full city council. The full council, each individual member has their own ability to nominate whomever they want, and whoever collects the most votes in their favor is who we call back for the position. So our role in this process is to hold the public space. Councilors can access this meeting live online. It also will be archived, and they can access it at other times. And then we'll also give a report to the full body on some of the highlights that each candidate brought forward.
So the full council is making votes on the basis of the record of this meeting.
In part, yes.
Okay.
In the resume.
I'm sorry. This is something this is a new experience for me. So
Yeah, so no city councilor is bound to the list of candidates before them.
I see.
Hopefully, because we're doing all this work and getting resumes and vetting the different candidates and understanding what they have to bring to the table, they'll make an informed decision. But it is a political process at its root, and therefore they're not bound to the list of candidates that we have before us this evening.
I understand.
A fundamental part of democracy is when an elected official takes a vote, there is no one that can tell them how to vote. So we try to use a business module. We try to use the way, job interviews, the way, skills and skill sets, are part of interviews and to find the best qualified candidate. But because we're elected, once we come to that final vote, it's the individual's decision as to who they're going to vote for, and there's no way of confining that into.
No, nor should there be. I agree with that, and I was just seeking a little more clarity on it. Thank you.
Yeah, and we appreciate the question. So the meeting at which we'll be nominating our candidates for the position is going to be October 2nd.
October 2nd.
Yep, it'll be here in this chamber, and you're welcome to come down if you like. You could also live stream it if you like. But our administrative assistant to the city council will follow up with you on next steps and details.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
Rebecca?
Thanks,
Hey,
Ian.
Bellamy?
Rebecca?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I just want to let him know that each member of the council does have the resumes of the applicants, even though they're not here.
That is good to know as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
If I pronounce it wrong. You're going in here to sit and
Right
discuss
here.
with the microphone. The green light means the microphone's on so they can hear you.
So the W is silent?
Yeah, Polish people say Wdowiak, but we just say Wdowiak to make it easier.
How about Irish people?
I don't say whatever you want.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, Tanya.
Nice to meet you as well.
Hi, we met out in the hall, Rebecca Lisi.
Yes.
I am standing in as chair this evening. Our chair, Jim Leahy, can't make it to the meeting, and so I am helping to facilitate the interview process this evening. To my right, I'm joined by Councilor at Large Joe McGivern, and then Councilor Linda Vacan from Ward 5, Councilor at Large Peter Tallman, and Bellamy Schmidt is our acting city auditor. So let's just pass the baton over to you, and Tanya, why don't you tell us a bit about your educational and work experience and how you feel that helps to qualify you for the city auditor position?
Well, I started working in accounting about 20 years ago as an administrative assistant. I did accounts payable, accounts receivable, payroll, and purchasing. And I worked my way up, and this is actually on the Cambridge College part of it, which is missing because, you know, I've been working a long time. So then I worked for the assistant dean, and I did budgets. I was the assistant to the assistant dean, and I would do the budgets for the different programs in the colleges. And then I would code all of the accounts payable and the accounts receivable, and I'd also check the payroll. And as time went on, other people obviously took on those responsibilities, and I went on to be the financial coordinator, where I'd work with program coordinators, doing their budgets, working with enrollment, making sure that all of the programs were feasible, and so that obviously the college would make money. And then I became the assistant director. I started working, doing the budgets for the whole college. I started being responsible for the facilities, the different coordinators of the different programs, so I would train them how to do their budgets and how to code all of their accounts payable, so that, you know, just to make sure that they actually purchased it and it was being charged off to the right line items. And that was at Cambridge College. I moved on from there. I actually got laid off. And I started working at the Job Corps, which was a great experience. And I started off as a finance manager. And that was actually a federally funded program. So it was a lot more stringent and strict than higher education. So I did learn a lot about the federal government and, you know, the different rules compared to, say, corporate rules or center rules. So we were actually working with 3 different standard operating procedures, 3 different sets of audits. And so, of course, I started off in the finance department, so I was in charge of, like, the business office and purchasing, accounts payable, and payroll. So what I would do for those different departments is just make sure they were following their standard operating procedures, because every 6 months or so we would have a different audit. So obviously, with that, not every department is perfect. And you would have to go on the audit and write, you know, process improvement plans with, like, deadlines and stuff like that, and just make sure that all of your employees, you know, bought into it. They knew what it was, because I had to speak about that, because, you know, if the people from the federal government in the Job Corps program came, they're going to ask them, how do they do this? How does this work? And everybody had to know that. Then I became the director. I was in charge of facilities, technology, transportation, the cafeteria, wellness, many other safety, different departments. And within all those were their own employees, their own managers, their own standard operating procedures. And then as a director, what you would do is you would take a budget and then you would have to break it down, create departmental budgets, make sure people knew how much money they had in what lines. The budget was, say, 32 lines. Each line had another line or another account number for the different programs in the different departments. So what I'd have to do is I'd have to obviously create reports, put them all together, make sure that they saw their reports, make sure that they were signing their purchase orders. They would send their purchase orders to purchasing. When it was received, it came into property. Property had to release it so that the accounts payable could pay it, within 30 days, or if we could get a discount or whatnot. So most of that experience, I went to work, I had another job after that. And right now I actually work in construction. I do a lot of compliance. I do a lot of their accounts payable. I do all of their billing, which is like $5 million a month. I make sure that all their costs are being charged off to the right projects and the right lines. Every budget for every project has its own line and account number. I'm sure, like, if you're familiar with finance, you know what I'm talking about. I also write their set-aside plans for the different states: state of Connecticut, city of Hartford, state of Massachusetts, state of New Hampshire, because obviously if you're getting DCAM, if you're getting Department of Transportation in Massachusetts, if you're getting state funds, you need to make sure that you're meeting their small business and minority requirements. You have to say what you're going to do, and then you have to do it. You have to purchase things from certain people. I know here in Holyoke we had a project on Lyman Street, and they had to hire so many people that actually were members of the city of Holyoke. So things like that. And with all of that, I saw this position open up. And I said, I can do all of that. And I actually saw it the last time it opened up, but I had missed the deadline. So I said, well, this is my opportunity. And so here I am.
Great. Thanks so much for coming down.
Thank you for having me.
Other questions from committee members?
Aye.
Councilor McGivern.
Thank you. Tanya, again, thank you for coming. Thank you for the interest, and then to come down to allow us to ask you some questions. Quite a vast experience you just went through, and you went through what Lincoln and I, and your resume has it all in front of us also, and I find it intriguing and something that looks like it comes into what the type of person that we need and are looking for in the city. Municipal experience, though, Mass General Law, the type of budget experience that government, can sometimes be the fundamentals of the private sectors, but different in Westover Job Corps might give you some insight. But can you elaborate on what you would need to know to fill the position in terms of Mass General Law regulations and how municipalities work with their budget process?
Well, I'm assuming they probably have a very large book of rules and regulations and budget processes and procedures. And I'm thinking, of course, Massachusetts can't overstep the federal laws. So I know what the federal law is. So I'm pretty sure I could learn what, the municipality of Holyoke, what their rules and regulations are, the state of Massachusetts. I've also worked with a lot of, I worked in higher education, so of course we had Mass grants, Mass scholarships, different, Massachusetts funding, research funding, things like that you would have to keep track of. That, of course, is probably a little bit different than working in a municipality, but it has its own rules and regulations. So I would definitely need to learn more about that. I know there's a lot of documentation. I'm pretty sure you have people in your building that are very competent that would be good resources that I could definitely work with and learn from. And, I would be very happy to learn more about the municipal system. Find it interesting.
There's a few people that could teach you a thing or two.
A couple?
Bellamy might help out a little bit, but we kept Bellamy out of retirement for so long. I don't know how much more gas he's got in his tank for us.
He's like, I'm not coming back again. So.
And you could just lead into same thought, same lines, but your computer skills and your knowledge and your ability to adapt to. Are you familiar with Munis? Or have you ever heard Munis before?
I've definitely heard of it. I'm not familiar with it, but I have worked with obviously many enterprise resource systems that are obviously all connected, have their own modules, and especially in the, in finance. Because, I'm not even sure if you do this kind of business, but like what I'm used to is somebody creates a purchase order, it gets sent to somebody to approve, make sure coding, somebody else does the purchasing, and then the purchasing puts it into the system so that when it comes in, then, they can receive it and it can be paid. All the inventory would be on there. I'm not sure if it works like that, but I'm assuming it may.
That's how we want it to work.
That's how everybody wants
music
it
to my
to
ears.
work, actually. And then you can pull like different reports, like say if you need a report for commitments or if you need a report for your payroll, to make sure that people are getting charged off on your on the accurate lines to the accurate departments, their salaries are appropriate and whatnot.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'll follow up with a question about budgets. So as the auditor for the city of Holyoke, you'll be managing a budget of $150 million. It seems that you have had a lot of experience overseeing budgets of various sizes. So what is the largest budget that you have managed, and what do you think some of the challenges, what challenges are you anticipating having to manage a budget of $150 million?
Well, a budget, like an operating budget, the largest I've had is say 15 million for an operating budget with like 5 million for maybe fleet management. And they had different program, probably like another 3 million in vocational funding. So altogether, maybe 25 million. Mm-hmm. And that's a large budget, that 150 million. And I would foresee it would have probably the same problems than somebody with $5 million. It just depends on how many departments, who's the managers, are they familiar with the systems, are they good with it, and are you getting information appropriately, are people communicating appropriately, are things getting charged off right, are people competent? I mean, on a larger scale, but pretty much I feel like the problems that people have, no matter what the budget area is, you know what I mean, no matter what the budget is, they're the same problems. Because at Cambridge College, my budget was 10 million, and I had the same problem there that I did in the Job Corps with 15 million. Right now, we have projects that probably, like I said, we do $4.5 million in receivables, and I handle all that like myself. So really, right now, our budgets all together, no one of them is, 150 million, but I bet we have a good 50, 60 million dollars in projects right now. Mm-hmm. In like 15 different projects with 15 different project managers, but it's honestly all the same. I'm sure that everybody has their own particular struggles, but I feel like with good communication and processes, you can work through your issues.
And have you had experience helping people to gain competencies where their particular department is falling short? Can you give an example of that?
Absolutely. Like say cafeteria at the Job Corps. So obviously, food is a commodity. So, and it's also cyclical. Maybe you're going to purchase some things in the fall more than, maybe it's more costly in the fall than it is in the spring and summer. Maybe your student enrollment is more in the fall or the spring and the summer. So you have to go by how many students you have. So say if it costs $1.75 per student and you thought you were going to have 300 students on center, but then you have 400, then you really need to work with that. Can you buy different food and stay within your budget? Or do you ask for an increase based on the fact that the price of beef went up? And how far do you want to take it? Do you have staff that you need, staff that you don't need? Can you use more students in the kitchen versus, paid employees? That would be the kind of things I would work with. Are you ordering too much inventory? Can you keep your inventory down? So as we're, obviously you need so much inventory, but you don't need so much that it goes into the couple months, So that would be how I'd work with it. I would communicate, with whoever it was, go through. Every manager of their budget obviously is going to have more information than, say, I would or anybody else would. So you would have to really communicate with them and find out what their needs are, how they want to, how they think, mm-hmm. and then work together to say, oh, this is workable, this is not workable, how are we going to put it all together? So that, we can come within our budget, or if we don't, see, the Job Corps wouldn't let you switch the money from lines. So if the cafeteria is its own budget, In order to be able to switch the lines, you actually had to write a letter to the Department of Labor saying, oh, I'm not making my budget line. So you had to do variance analysis every month to make sure you were always on target.
And we have a process for interdepartmental transfers, but there is a process that you have to follow before you can make those switches.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah, see?
Other questions from committee members? Councilor Bacon?
Thank you. So you've spoken about dealing in a multi-department situation, and so the translation for the municipal piece would be dealing with the city council. There are more of us, a few more, and then on the other side, in the executive capacity, is the mayor, and then of course the department heads that we've been talking about. So we all represent the folks that have elected us, those of us on the council and the mayor, and sometimes we bring to bear different philosophies, different approaches, different ideas about how to best accomplish that. In that process, we rely on our auditor to keep us well-informed relative to our cash situation, relative to borrowing, and you're going to run into different philosophies relative to the use of monies. For example, a stabilization fund that we have that helps us to guarantee a good bond rating and has some strict limitations on its use, but of course, that is an area of debate. And so I'm interested to know, with different pressures coming at you from different groups that may have competing or differing ideas about how to accomplish something, what would be your general approach in a situation such as that?
I would want you to communicate with each other and with me. I feel like if there's a disagreement, there's always a resolution. You might not like it, but I feel like people have good reasons for their decisions, and if you can explain them appropriately and it makes sense, that communication should probably do the trick. That's how I feel. I document everything. I personally would go back and research, like, what have people done in the past? What's the process that you have in place for these kind of, differences in opinion? Is there a process for it? Can you come and state your case? Can people vote on it? Can they come in front of city council and be like, this is what I want to do with those funds and this is why? And you have the opportunity to ask questions, and maybe they have good ones and maybe they don't, and can people vote? I don't know what your process is. I've never obviously been a part of it, but I just feel like people should communicate. You can't, especially when it comes with money, you can't always have what you want. Not everybody can have what they want. Are you going to give up something for it? Are you going to give up some money somewhere else for it? Does it make sense? Who really wants it? So I would go with that. But I also would be documenting it all, every meeting, everything, and having everybody sign it so that it's fair. And you can go back in the future, if you have another issue, you can go back and look at that situation and say, well, this is how we handled that time, and it seemed to work out good.
And as a follow-up, if I may? So in a circumstance where, say, we're borrowing money for a long-term, large capital purchase, and one of the metrics that we would use is, well, how much room is there in our borrowing capacity? As part of sharing the information relative to that borrowing, would you see it as a matter of regular practice if you're asked one piece of the question that you would disclose along with, say, how much borrowing capacity remains, how much it would cost if we use that borrowing capacity on an ongoing basis and into the future? Would you see that as part of just the information you would naturally provide when asked a more narrow question, as an example?
I'm trying to make sure that I have your question right, but I'm thinking that I guess it is. I guess the thing is, like, what is it?
So
what is it? What is it? Do we have to have it? Do we have to have it? Is it a necessity? Because if it's a necessity, that's one thing, but if it's just something that you want to do, that's another thing. And can it wait? Can it wait until next year? Say if you bring in more money, can it wait till next year where you have more free cash flow? Maybe you can do that without using your borrowing, because you don't want to borrow a lot of money, because like you said, you're worried about your rating. You definitely don't want to have or build up a lot of like, say, loans or whatever debt. You don't want, and long-term debt, to me, is way different than short-term debt. You know, so that's why I'm saying, like, what is it? And are we doing it for 20 years? Or are we doing it for 5?
Can I just ask one more
Yeah.
related?
Was that your answer?
Yes, that's a good answer.
Okay.
But just to be,
Just
just
to
to
make
be a little bit more concrete about it. Say we
Absolutely.
were looking to borrow $20 million.
Okay.
And so the question you might be asked is, how much more room do we have in our borrowing capacity? Are we at 30%, 40%, 70%, da-da-da-da? So that's one narrow answer. Say we're at 45% of our borrowing capacity. I'm just interested to know if part of that answer would be, we're at X percent, but if you go to this percent, it's going to cost you X dollars a
Gonna
year
affect
to
you
carry that.
I would do the whole
loan.
thing.
Okay.
I would say everything, because it's all important.
Right, okay.
It's all, every
Thank you.
single piece of it is important. How much is it costing us this month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, a year, 2 years? What's it gonna do to us in the long run if we don't bring in this money, but we have this loan? Then maybe we're down to 0%, So I would say everything, because it's all important.
Right, thank you. Because I asked that question because in many situations, we know one question to ask, but we might not know all of the other questions to ask that will then come back to bite us
Yeah,
later.
and then you don't have the full answer.
So if we get a more complete answer, then we might have specifically asked for
Right.
it.
Right. And that's just like when you said, working with, say, budget managers. Not everybody has that finance and accounting background where they realize the implications of their actions. So those are the things that I would want to communicate. Because I think if you have a clear understanding, maybe if you don't get your way, you will understand it better and have a full appreciation of a decision. That's what I feel like.
Yeah,
Thank you.
because at the end of the day, we may want to do something, and there may be various ways to achieve that. And so we need information in order to make the decision that's going to
best.
serve those interests best.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Other questions
You're
from committee
welcome.
members? Councilor Tallman.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for coming down, Tanya, showing an interest in this position, the city. It's a very, very important financial position in the city, and one of our roles is, one of our appointments is this appointment, and it's very, very important to the total running of the city. The question I have, and I noticed on your resume, you've been an assistant director and a director. You get a chance to work with people and probably supervises some people too.
Many
What type of
people.
interactions you've had supervising, and how do you feel your role? There's probably 2 to 3 people you would be supervising in this office itself. And how would you treat those employees, or how would you look to them for guidance in the new position that you would have?
Well, I would treat them fair. I would be supportive. And all together, we would work as a team. Everybody has strengths, everybody has weaknesses, everybody has knowledge. I will treat everybody with respect, just the same way as I would want to be treated. And I would work together. But I also am not lenient when it comes to laziness, I will say that. Incompetency. I've worked with a lot of people, and I know that one person can ruin an environment. One person that's not happy or not pulling their weight or doesn't want to be there. And so, but I would always be fair. That's how I would treat people, and I would give them the respect, that they deserve. And I would, obviously, if I came into a new position, I'm going to need those strengths and that knowledge to be able to build up my own, to be able to be successful.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any further questions from committee members?
I could.
Councilor McGivern?
Tanya, I liked your answer when you were and you have a very unique and candid way of describing things and expressing yourself, which I, for one, appreciate, because you just go
Thank you.
straightforward and get right into it. And I think the way you express yourself about having to work with a variety of different people, which would be, certainly would be included with our department heads and each of their own budgets, having to have a knowledge of what's going on in each of those budgets, and communication is key, and having to be able to collect the necessary data so that you can do your job and do your analysis and do your reporting. And I think, at least I do, I think most of us understand that's a big part about what an auditor has to do and needs to do to the best of their ability. Municipal government and munis and things like that are things that anyone with education like yours and skills and willingness can learn. So you list your residency within the city of Holyoke. I take it you have some understanding of our government.
I do.
Okay, we have a mayor and we have a city council. We have other elected officials, but when it comes to the budget, except for the schools, it's pretty much us. I'm sure, I don't know how much you follow government, but I'm not asking, but I'm sure you've noticed that, and I'm not just saying current and, elected officials, but over the years, mayors tend to think, they're in charge, and city councilors tend to think they're in charge. And sometimes that causes a lot of friction and butting of heads. It's kind of part of the process. Good government is when we get to a level playing field and compromise and meet. And good government is when the level playing field means everybody has the same shared data. What would your role be in terms of you're appointed by the city council, but the manager, the CFO, the executive director of the city is the mayor in terms of management? What would your role be in terms of sharing that data? How would you see the most important thing you have to do once you collect all the data from the various departments?
Well, I believe what I would do is I would consider what you want and what you're looking for and the questions that you have as well as his. And I would give you all the same information. What he asked for, I would give to you to do with whatever you choose, but you would definitely have the information if you wanted to look at it and ask questions. And same with him, because how can you all work together as a team even if you all think you're in charge, if you all don't have the same information? If you have information and you don't look at it, then that I can't help that. And that's what I'm going to say to you when you come back to me and say, why didn't I know this? I'm going to be like, oh, well, I put that on your desk 2 weeks ago, so you did, and I'm happy to go over it with you any day. I would say that to him as well if you don't look at it. But I'll give you the same information. So if you ask me a question and I'll give you the answer, I would also give him the answer. And I would also give the answer to anybody else it affects, because it's obviously important. Correct?
Very important, and a very nice answer. The only thing is, not the only thing, but just to, and I think you said it, but I don't want to put words in your mouth, is obviously you probably, in most circumstances, would be meeting closer or likely to give the mayor the information first. The timeliness of when the city council gets the information is important. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you said we all need to have the same information because
At the same time, on the same day. It's fair.
knowledge is making educated decisions, and the knowledge is having the information at the same time.
You said that way nicer than I did.
I told you.
You may have more practice.
You want a
You
job,
might
Counselor McGinnis?
have more practice than me at that.
Any other further questions then? Tanya, we thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Just to give you a sense of what's next in this process, this committee doesn't make a recommendation on any particular candidate. We just present the highlights of each candidate to the full council. The full council has the ability to watch this meeting live or to access it at some other time. They also have everyone's resumes in hand. So what we'll do is on October 2nd, each member of the city council has the ability to nominate whomever they choose. They're not limited to those that we've interviewed this evening even. But on October 2nd, the full city council will have the ability to nominate someone. You're welcome to come down that evening, and I'm sure that our administrative assistant, Ryan Allen, will follow up with you on the time and place.
Wonderful, thank you.
And Tanya, feel free to call any city councilor who's not here or who is here this evening if you have questions or want to answer their questions.
Great, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming down.
Thank you for having me. Enjoy your night. What's going on over here in the, is that like this? No, but there was something going on in like the area over there where by across from the bus station.
Oh, there
like
was a gathering
music
tonight.
and all kinds of.
For the
Hurricane?
I think it's to
victims
recognize,
of the storm in Puerto Rico
yeah.
last year.
Oh, yeah.
Of remembrance.
That was the same time.
Yes.
Last year.
Yes.
Right, it's a year, yeah.
Yeah, it's a year.
Being nosy, yes. I heard you have a fashion show as well. So.
Yes, lots of things going on.
Thanks.
Okay? I don't think so unless they showed up. We'll give Bellamy a minute, I guess.
If we have anyone else.
What?
We don't know who didn't come yet because we don't know if everybody is, if there's anyone else out there, but. Matthew, is that it, Melanie?
Yes, that's it.
No Grant Well, oh, wow, no Grant Wells, huh?
Thank you for the extracurricular work, Bellamy.
No, he didn't show up, and I wish he had, but
That's a little surprising.
that surprised me, is he talked to Hector last week, and he was, I don't know.
Well, we'll give benefit of doubt that, and he could have communicated to Jim or Hector or someone else. We have an order in front of us.
Nice job. See, I am gonna give you a.
I did say the first item on the agenda is,
I thought this went very well, I thought you brought the right stuff up.
we probably did receive it.
Yeah, I just don't know if there's an order. But
I appreciated the pre-interviews where they did happen. I found that very helpful, especially since there were so many.
Yeah, that's the process I'm used to.
I find that to be a good process.
Yeah, that's a good way to do it.
Did you interview candidates beyond Matthew and Tanya?
And Hood-Burgess, who,
Yeah,
I guess he found another job.
okay.
We were noticed on that, I think.
Yes.
He was on the list, but he didn't show up. And Hector said he declined early.
And you had access to the full list of candidates that we have before us this evening? No one new showed up? Okay. Okay, so Ryan, I know that you're downstairs recording this. It's unclear if we are acting on an order because the agenda doesn't have a particular order, it just says interviews. So if you could see if there's an order associated with this process, it would be great to note that we've been able to comply with that order. I think that there is one filed,
there was something, I just don't know.
at least once.
But this is not the first round of interviews. We had, the second one, there was only one candidate, and the first one goes back a while. So I know there's something in the jacket. I'm gonna make a suggestion, and I don't think it's gonna be agreeable, but today is, as we know, is 2 weeks before our next meeting. There are other items, the chairman, I actually was speaking to him last night, that he needs to get out, and he's hoping to get out before other appointments that we have to act on, that he wants to get out by the October meeting. If there is anyone else on the list that had a legitimate reason for not showing up this evening, I'd just like to keep this open so that the committee, if they have, if the chairman agrees, would be able to work any additional interviews into the schedule before October. Well, I mean, the way the president set this up with the chairman was, any city councilor, because we all got notified, that wanted a candidate interviewed, let them know, and they will go on the list.
Yeah.
And that's where the original list of 10 came out of 26. The city did some screening out, they screened it down to 3. The city council screened it down to 10. But of the 10, only 7 said they would come this evening. Of the 7, only 4 came. So I'm just thinking if those other 3 had a reason for not being here, that we might just keep the open mind and an open window that we could interview.
It's fair.
Sure.
So I would make a motion to table it, but knowing that if there isn't a meeting, we could remove it from committee to act on it.
Sure, that sounds fine. So moved.
Make a motion to table too. So moved. And,
All in favor?
aye.
Aye. Motion carries.
Motion to adjourn.
Without any debate?
Without any